Let me jump to this story right here from Newsbusters. CNN Tapper finally discover misleading COVID hospitalization numbers. My response to this is conspiracy theorists 49,837, corporate press 0. This is something that independent media has talked about for some time. It's something that the quote unquote conspiracy theorists have been saying for some time, that there is a difference between being hospitalized with COVID, meaning you went there for some reason, and turns out you had COVID, and being hospitalized from COVID. Newsbusters reports, for nearly 2 years and with the midterm election coming up, conservatives and Republicans were vilified as conspiracy theorists for raising questions about COVID hospitalization numbers when it came to who was there because of COVID and who just happened to be infected. On Monday, CNN and anchor Jake Tapper finally arrived at the scene to ask the obvious questions after CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky admitted to Fox News the numbers inflated by upwards of 40%. Tapper prefaced his late revelation by prefacing to CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta that, quote, the case numbers aren't really as significant as hospitalizations because what's important is how sick people are getting. And since CNN had obfuscated the idea that the CDC was misleading people, Tapper had to spell out what was going on. Over the weekend, the CDC director, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, was asked how many people are in the hospital for COVID versus how many people are in the hospital with COVID. Meaning that they're there for some reason, and it's also true they have COVID. After playing the soundbite of Walensky admitting up to 40% of the patients who are coming in with COVID are coming in not because they're sick with COVID, but because they're sick with something else, Tapper seemed a bit surprised and called it misleading, saying, so the hospitals are still stretched thin because of this. So I'm not trying to take away from that. But if 40% in some hospitals, 40% of the people who have COVID don't necessarily have problematic COVID, they're there because they got in a car accident. They're there because, they bumped their head and they're being included as in the hospital with COVID. That number seems kind of misleading. And there you go. I mean, this is something we've long talked about. And now finally it's hitting the mainstream. And why is it? Why do you guys think it is that they're finally
because Omicron's not hurting people that bad relative to the old versions.
No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is this data has been out there already.
I think Tapper got Omicron. I don't know if he did. And he was like, what? This was like nothing. Why are people wigging out? And so now he's like, and there's the with and from thing. And so it's all like clicking for him now. Well, that's my personal.
Well, there's a lot of things at play here. And I remember early on when everything was happening, there was a case of a man being shot in the head that was listed as an official COVID death, I believe in California. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, how? How does that make sense? This goes along, I believe, to what we were saying before. If you inflate the numbers, if you make them higher, you're going to scare a lot more people. If you make them believe that you might be a huge victim here, you might be hurt, the chances of being hurt are high. And as soon as I heard this story, I'm like, yes, of course. We've been talking about this for months because hospitals also are being paid for every COVID patient that they have, are also being paid for putting patients on ventilators, and are also being paid for COVID patients dying. So, I don't think there's, in some instances a financial incentive, but there is a lot of money changing hands here when the numbers go a specific way here that do allude that there is a possibility that this is true.
We got the story from USA Today. Our ruling true. We rate the claim that hospitals get paid more if patients are listed as COVID-19 and on ventilators as true. Hospitals and doctors do get paid more for Medicare patients diagnosed with COVID-19, or if it's considered presumed they have COVID-19 absent a laboratory confirmed test, and 3 times more if the patients are placed on a ventilator to cover the cost of care and loss of business resulting from a shift in focus to treat COVID-19 cases. This is what people were saying all throughout the last year. If you go to the hospital, this is from April 27th, 2020. It's almost 2 years ago. USA Today told us this, and CNN's only now bringing it up.
Yeah.
In the long history of bromides, platitudes, and tropes, most have been ultimately debunked over time. They become conventional wisdom, and they collapse under the weight of their own nonsense. Never has follow the money been debunked. Mm-hmm. Never, ever, once has it not proven to lead you to the place where the truth is. It might not be totally dispositive, but you can't minimize the importance of people acting in their own financial best interest. I don't care who they are. I don't care if they're elected. I don't care if they're scientists. It just doesn't happen. That's an extraordinary thing to think about. The hundreds of thousands, the millions of dollars that are in the wind based on a decision that ultimately is going to be reported as fact. That's a heck of a thing.
Yep. Cui bono is always the question that a lot of people
Who
ask.
profits?
Who
Yes.
benefits? Who gets something from this? And for the government to incentivize and take our money, because people think it's free money. People think that a lot of these procedures, a lot of these products are free. They're not. We're paying for them in one way or another. But for the government to incentivize and pay hospitals to give them more money when they have more COVID cases, more ventilators, more deaths, is, again, incentivizing something that is obviously something that clearly shouldn't be incentivized. And for that to happen, it's absolutely crazy.
But-
We've been saying it for years, and now we finally know about it.
Is this the breaking point? You know, you mentioned, I think you just mentioned a moment ago, people are starting to get less scared of this.
Well, for me, there's always, I call it a POS, or a period of splat. All things have to go splat, right, before you punch through. And it's not written in the stars. I don't know when it is exactly, but this will tip, right? And it'll be a combination of things. And for me, I can feel it. I feel that a lot of things that a lot of people I hold in high regard have been saying for 18 months are getting a kind of snowball feel behind it. And so, yeah, I don't know that it'll get worse before it gets better. It might get a little weirder over the next couple of weeks, but look, if I were to guess, I'd say we're much, much, much closer to the end.
Well, this goes along with the theory that I was actually talking about a few weeks ago that goes along with a lot of what medical professionals are saying, is that because this Omicron is so transmissive and less lethal, that it will run through people, run through countries, and then people will go out the other end with natural immunity and therefore absolutely get rid of this pandemic. So this is a train of thinking that's out there right now. And I think a lot of people in power might be realizing that. And that's why we're having these shock announcements by the CDC, by CNN, going back on essentially a lot of the falsehoods surrounding this entire story, because the game could be over in just a few weeks from now. And that means a lot of ramifications for a lot of the people that betrayed us.
It needs to be over, especially politically.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a disaster for those who are advocating for COVID policies come November.
Well, this is what I said after coming from New York City, is talking to people there. They had enough. They're sick of complying with the whims of this insanity. They're sick of just going along, being told to obey, to get permission to go to the store, to go to the theaters. It's absolutely insane. And for Democrats to win politically, they have to get rid of this idea that they have to be the nanny state of the individual, controlling every aspect of their existence. And that's why with the upcoming elections, that was another reason I brought up. I think it was in the sponsor lounge that me and you were talking about this. My kind of overall theory why this is going to be ending very soon, because this is extremely unpopular. This goes against the free spirit, the free human will, and there's no way they could get away with this moving forward from my perspective, from what I see. And there's also this feeling, as Mike explained, that it's there.
And look, I think there's something even bigger under all of it. We can talk about the politics and we can talk about the science, but you remember Hans Christian Andersen wrote an amazing story called The Emperor's New Clothes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Now, if you don't know the story, the bottom line is the emperor was convinced that his new clothes were beautiful, and the tailors didn't really make any clothes at all. He was naked, and he sat naked on his throne as he was paraded down the street, and all of the townspeople came out, and they all oohed and ahed at how beautiful his clothes were. And so it was just this giant, weird, happy fiction unfolding in this little town, until a kid pointed at the emperor and said, "He's naked." and then, right, there was a hush comes over the crowd, and then somebody else said, "Well, you know, he does appear to be conspicuously nude," right? And so if you look back at the last 18 months, guys, and ask yourself, okay, who's the kid? Who's the kid in the crowd? We can all probably think, you know, Joe Rogan was
I
a
was
pretty
gonna
good
say
kid.
that.
We were all thinking it.
We are.
Joe's a kid in the crowd. Ben Shapiro's a kid in the crowd. You, right? I mean, in a very, very small way, I was saying some things very, very early on that got a lot of pushback with regard to, wait a second, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, and I'm not a Luddite, but I have some questions, especially when Gavin is dining out and Nancy's getting her hair done, and I have some questions, right? So I think in a lot of ways, to your point, the temptation to say, I told you so, is something that we ought to resist, but it's also something we ought to acknowledge, because if you've spent the last 18 months being that kid in the crowd, And now you're finally starting to feel like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, so I'm not the only one that sees. 40% of the people in the hospital are not there because of, but with. That's language matters. Even little prepositions, right? That's a big, big, big deal.
Yeah, and if you listen to them talk, Tapper at one point says that they're asymptomatic, a bunch of these 40%.
They just detected it. And, well, maybe it's because they're getting money. I like the, what you were saying about the kid in the crowd. That's the story. But I also wonder if there's another trope there in that, the king is demanding of his subjects, do as I say or else. And then the jester mocks him and everyone laughs. And he says, don't laugh at me. And the jester mocks him again. And that depowers the despot.
That's right.
So that's possible. That's kind of how I see, Joe Rogan. He's a comedian. And when he does his show, when he does his comedy, when he does entertainment, be it serious or otherwise, people like being a part of it. It feels good. So it's not necessarily the same thing as the kid saying, you have no clothes, and everyone kind of being like, well, he said it. I guess he's right. But also people feeling like now it's okay because everyone's laughing together.
The point is, it had to be the kid because the adults couldn't do it. Now, in this corollary, look, it could have been Jake Tapper 18 months ago, but it wasn't. It could have been Anderson Cooper. It could have go down the list and look at all of the journalists who could have been that kid, who could have been Rogan. What did it take to really start the splat series of dominoes to go? It took a comedian who got famous for eating maggots on a reality show.
I don't think he ate
He
them.
encouraged
Other
other
people
eat
eat
maggots.
No. He would eat one to shame them into doing it.
nice.
Oh, yeah, no. Joe would eat a maggot. Are you kidding? And a kickboxer and a martial artist.
Yeah.
That's what we needed to get Robert Malone out there, to get the whole Getter thing happening.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
People never know how it's going to start, and we never know how it's going to splat.
But
it's almost always the result of an unlikely voice.
But it's amazing how I'm just flabbergasted at the thought that Joe Rogan is our generation's like Walter Cronkite. Or
Steve Bannon explained it to us. If you remember what he was telling us when he was here as a guest, that during the major historical events like the Civil War or the Revolutionary War, it's never the politicians or the people in prominence that are the significant historical figures. It's always the laborers, the farmers, the people who are affected by these changes and decide to stand up and represent bigger ideas themselves because of how affected they are by them.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to watch live, you can check out this channel Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Now, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and if you want more unfiltered and uncensored content with all of these guests, go to timcast.com and become a member. All of these guests you know and love in exclusive segments on our website where we are unrestricted in what we talk about, so you'll definitely not want to miss it. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all next time.